The first of those being talking to your players. Now, it sounds like obvious, right? It sounds like something that you wouldn't need to be advised to do, but we can get so focused on the roles that we play at the table. We can be focused on, I'm the game master, and they are PCs, and they have classes, and all of this stuff going on in the narrative and in the mechanical layers of the game, that we forget that ostensibly we're playing role-playing games with our friends, and that they're people. And even at a game where you're playing with total strangers, if you're at a convention and you're playing a game and you're only going to see these people for maybe 3 hours and you'll never see them again in your whole life, they're still human beings, and you can still communicate with them as if they were human beings. And what I mean by that is setting the game aside, right? A lot of GM advice funnels the GM's authority into the social structures of the game, and that can be really toxic because you can approach a problem a player is having or a problem two players are having with each other or just a general discomfort at the table. If you approach it from a position of authority, then not only are you personally responsible for solving that problem, which you don't want to be responsible for, but you are somehow in a position where your opinion or your resolution is better or more important than theirs. So what I often say to people when they run into trouble with their players or with the game or whatever's going on in their campaign, I say, take a break. Like, just stop playing. Like, if everybody is having a weird time and you're not comfortable and things feel strange, just stop. Just say, okay, like, we are all aware of this being an issue, or, you know, we need a minute, and get some water, take a break, stretch your legs, and when you come back, rather than jumping right back into the game, say, hey, can we talk about this thing that's going on, right? It seems like this player is not having fun, or I notice the two of you keep arguing. Can we as a group, as equals, not players of the game, but just as friends, can we talk about it? And I find that 9 times out of 10, if you start with that approach, and you do it at the beginning of the game, and you do it regularly throughout the game, you do it in between campaigns, in between sessions, you just talk to your players and encourage conversation, a lot of the stress of like being a good GM and making sure everyone has fun will just bleed away. And I think that this advice applies evenly to this kind of weird thing, and I've tried so hard to figure out where this came from, where this weird little thorn in the side of game masters came from. The idea that the GM is the one whose job it is to make sure everyone has fun, it's total bullshit. That's not real. It's everyone's responsibility to make sure that they are having fun and that everyone else is having fun. And if you notice someone that is having a bad time, the GM isn't the one that needs to step in and fix that. Anyone can say, hey friends, this is weird. Let's stop for a second and check in and make sure everyone's having a good time. Are we enjoying this? Are we interpreting the rules the way we all want to? If you can internalize that for yourself as a game master and you can set a good example, your players will start to do it too. And this is something that if you've watched Swan Song or Nebula Jazz, really any show that Sam or JP are on, you'll notice that they've done this. My players pick up habits from me where it might be the way that you describe something and they start to do it. JP has started using the sort of cinematic language to describe what's going on in his character. He'll describe the beginning of a scene totally unprompted. He'll be like, okay, we're here and this is happening, and all I have to do is sit back and be like, oh, is it? Okay, yeah, sure, we can find out what's happening in your character's house. I wasn't planning on that, but you can do it. And you'll notice, like with Sam, as the other example, he also has sort of started to become more GM-ly in his play. And I think this is the good part of the authority of being a game master, is that you get to set an example. You get to sit down and you get to be good at playing role-playing games, and you can teach your players to do that. And so you can do it directly by having these conversations, or you can just behave yourself and be a good example to your players. So treating the people that you play with like they're humans shouldn't be too hard, unless you're playing with dwarves, I guess, or orcs, but that's a different matter. That shouldn't be hard, but it can be easy to forget. So I think that if you're having trouble with your game, if you're running into issues, that's the first place. It's just like get everyone else to help you take on that burden, because it's not yours alone as a game master. The other big rule, the other thing that I say to people that are having trouble, the other reason that I think people run into issues is that they're playing the wrong game. And I think that this can come from a lot of different places. You can be playing a game because it's the only game that anybody knows how to play at the table. You could be playing the wrong game because it's the game that this group always plays. It might be that you don't have access to a bunch of different games, and these are just the ones that you have. I think the other thing that causes this problem is that the people that make and sell role-playing games lie to you. And I don't think they do it on purpose, but they want to sell games. I mean, I'm sure you've heard someone say, oh, you can do anything with Dungeons and Dragons, right? If you want a game that's just like Game of Thrones, sure, D&D. What class is Stannis Baratheon? He's not a D&D character. You want to play a murder mystery. You want to play a social intrigue game. Dungeons and Dragons, but that's not true. Games exist to create a certain kind of narrative. They impel certain actions. They give you tools to fulfill those actions, and that's built into the game. But we don't often get told, and I think for good reason, if you don't want to, don't play this game, because then people will say, okay, I won't, and they'll find something else. And if you're trying to sell your game, it's not exactly good marketing. So I think that people run into these problems, and I get questions all the time where they say, I'm trying to do a social intrigue game, and all anyone wants to do is fight things. Or we've been playing Warhammer, and all anyone wants to do is mope and be sad about how it's raining all the time, and they only have one leg. And it's like, you're playing a game in which being mopey in the rain with one leg is part of the game's design. The game is built to create that kind of narrative, and your creative agenda can be helped by that if that's the kind of game that you want to play. But people run into issues when they're playing the game and the game doesn't fit. In the same way, you can't build a house with a paintbrush, and you can't make a Picasso with a hammer. You need the right tools for the job that you and your players are trying to do. And you can cut this problem off before it ever happens by doing a session 0 with your players. Does anybody know what session 0 is? Hands, yeah, some nodding, I see. Okay, so session 0, for anyone who doesn't, is this kind of unstated, though we're seeing it in more designs. I've seen a few games that explicitly call out that session 0 is a thing, but it's the session before the session. Sometimes it includes character creation. Sometimes it's even before that, it's choosing the game. But it's a way to create buy-in. And buy-in is what happens when everyone agrees to the kind of story that you're going to tell together. It's what happens when everybody agrees that that's how it's going to happen. We talk about the characters together. What kind of characters can we make to fulfill that promise? And that's where we choose the game. Because if you go in and you say, we're playing Dungeons and Dragons, you have to assume that all of your players agree that you're going to fight monsters and you're going to explore, and most of the tools that your characters are going to have to resolve conflict are going to lead them into fantasy action violence, right? That's just built into the game. But if you don't talk about it, you might have a player who, they roll a bard and they say, cool, I'm going to just like not fight anybody. My character's a pacifist and I'm just going to make friends with all the NPCs. And then when the barbarian and the fighter and the paladin just start murdering everyone, they're going to realize like, oh, this is not the game for me. Like I made the wrong character, or I don't want to have this experience. And if you didn't talk about it first, that can be a really hard place to get out of for that player, and it can create tension for your group. So if you're in the middle of a campaign and it's not going great, you're having some trouble, try talking to your players. Make sure that everyone has buy-in. You've all agreed that this is the game you want to play. You're having a good time with it. The problem doesn't lie with the game, because if it does, it's time to switch. Play another game. End the campaign. Put it on hiatus. Let players leave if they're not enjoying the game. And then play the right game. So it's the right game with the right people, and the only way to figure that out is to talk to your players. So apply those two things if you're having problems. Make sure you're playing the right game, make sure you're talking to people like they're people, and that should lead you out of most of the common stuff. Now, all the common stuff aside, I'm ready to field your weird questions. So raise your hand if you have a question, and then we'll tour the mic around, and we'll do the office hours thing.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So, hi. My question is very simple. How would you go with pitching a new system to a group of players who predominantly were playing, for, let's say, D&D 5e?
Okay.
And they're like, I'm not sure about that. Those are weird dice. Like, can we do it with D20?
Yeah.
Any tips about that?
Yeah. Okay, so the question is, how do you teach? So you have a game that you really like and you want to try, and you have players who might be like a little reluctant to learn something new. This is pretty common, right? We get built up experience playing games. If you've played the same game for 3 months or 6 months or a year, you spent a bunch of money on it, you probably want to keep playing that game. You want to make sure you get the mileage out of it and you feel comfortable with the roles, you know what's expected of you. So it absolutely can be a big challenge trying to teach something new to someone. And the way that I usually suggest going about that is look at how different the game that you want them to play or you want to try with them is from the game they're comfortable with, right? If they're playing Pathfinder and you want to teach them Fiasco, it's a big gap between those two games. It's a big jump, not only in what the game is about. One is about fighting monsters and the other is being terrible people. I guess they're kind of similar that way. D&D characters aren't very nice. But the other one is more like cinematic and there's no GM and it's pretty different. That can be a big jump. And if you are, like many people who are passionate about role-playing games, if you are kind of like an evangelist for those games, it can be easier to find brand new players for that game than it would be to teach an old dog new tricks, right? To say, I know you like Dungeons and Dragons, but put away your elf ears and your magic wand. We're gonna play a game about people trying to rob a casino. So what I would do in that case, if they're very different, is try to find someone or something in the middle ground between those games and sort of move them towards that, right? Find a game that's similar enough or allows them to play something familiar for them and then ease them into mechanics. So like Fiasco as an example, there's a play set in Fiasco where you play adventurers, like Dungeons and Dragons characters, who have just come back from a successful dungeon and now they're fighting over who gets the gold, right? So that's a much easier jump to get to that place. So I think familiarity is the first point. Look for something in common. It might be literal, it might be figurative. And this is about talking to your players and say, what do you like about the game we're playing now? What do you love about 5th edition? They're probably not going to say things like, I love making death saves. Or like, I really like Eldritch Blast. They're going to say, I like being an evil warlock. Or they're going to say, I like getting in situations where my character might die. And you can find games that are like that. The other thing you can do is reduce the level of investment that's required, right? If you've been playing D&D for 50 sessions, God help you, and your players are all very invested in that, it can be really hard to say, all right, we're going to put that aside and we're going to spend the next year playing this other game. That's scary because they want to play with you. They're your friends. They like playing with you. They might not want to play a game that 3 sessions in, they're like, oh, I don't like this. But if I don't play this game, I don't get to be with my friends. I don't get to hang out and do the fun social stuff. So play a one-shot, right? Tell them, and you can slip this in on a day that maybe not everyone can make it, or like someone's on vacation, or you're in between arcs in your regular campaign. You can slip in another game and say, all right, today we're going to do a one-shot of this like other weird thing, and if you hate it, you never have to play it again, and we'll go back to D&D, and it's fine, and we're going to do that anyway, right? It's like a special treat, right? So that's the other way, is to find common ground between what they already like and what you like about this game, and then give them the opportunity to try it out without having to invest forever, without it feeling like a big decision. They're not getting married to this new game. I think I'm like you. I always want to play new stuff and I want to show off new things, and people just want to play D&D, which is fine. I play a lot of Dungeons and Dragons, and it does what it does really well, but there's so many cool games, and it's very hard to be the only person, or feel like the only person in the whole world who's really excited about this weird game. So one-shots really help, and finding players that are flexible and doing that. You can play it at cons. The last note I would say would be have a pitch, right? Have a short way of explaining the game, and use that to get the players excited about it. And you don't even have to do it yourself, right? You can find like YouTube videos about the game, or you can find like other people who have played it and been like, look, doesn't this look like fun? Look at this fun thing somebody else did. You could do it too with me. I know this game, let's play it. So yeah, give them an opportunity to try it out, and once they get over that initial nervousness, that initial fear, they'll probably like it as much as you do, or at least some of them will. And then you'll have 2 game groups, and you can play twice as much. Cool. Question over here. I saw some things. Yeah.
Hi. I wanted to ask, because the content that comes from you that I enjoy the most is Court of Swords. So it's kind of tied into this. What is the most memorable moment that left you feeling fulfilled as a good dungeon master? Like top 3 moments that left you feel the most fulfilled, and why?
This is good. This is like, it feels like a planted question, because the question was, Court of Swords is awesome. Why is it awesome? Well, what do we got? Another like 45 minutes? No more questions. We're just going to talk about how great I am as a dungeon master. So Court of Swords is a long-running 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons game. We've been running it on roleplay for what feels like ever. I think I was born playing it. And the cast has changed over time. The game's vibes feel very different. And it's changed a great deal, but it's always been 5th edition D&D. And in terms of the moments and like what about it makes me feel like good, there were a few moments throughout the campaign where, for me as a game master, what's really rewarding is watching the players pick up on and invest in the world that we're all creating together, right? Where they make decisions based on things that I have said in previous episodes, or they've picked up on something and they've cared enough about it to make it part of their character. I think as game masters, we all do this sometimes, where you like say something that you think is really valuable and interesting, and the players are just like, they just don't hear it, and it goes in one ear and out the other, and you're like, this is the thing. Okay, it's the bad guy. He's here. He's in disguise. I'm trying to make it subtle, but no, that's him. Go get him. And so the opposite of that is so rewarding when a player is clearly paying attention, and when you bring something back, they notice it. And I've seen that happen a few times throughout the game. But you know who's really good at that is chat. Chat is so good. Court of Swords is my favorite for streaming because there's so much of that, and because the people that watch it are obsessively detail-oriented, and it's so good because when I mention something, those little details that I put out there, they're not just for the players anymore, they're for the audience. So when I say, you know, you see a man with a blue scarf sneaking out of the alley, the players are like, I don't care about the scarf, but chat is like, this is the guy from 45 episodes ago. I'm like, yes, thank you for noticing. It feels nice to be appreciated. So that for me is like having the audience, and having the audience still, after 110 episodes, still buy into that world. I think mechanically, from like a game design and dungeon mastering perspective, the new experience system that we use for Court of Swords. So in Court of Swords, we use a player-driven experience system. We don't use regular XP, we don't use milestones. I let the players decide what their characters want, and then I decide how difficult that is, and when they achieve it, they get experience. Max hates it. But they've been using it really well, and it's dramatically impacted the game. Like if you look at Court of Swords prior to episode 53, it's an entirely different campaign than it is afterwards. And so, like with publishing Dungeon World, like with working on Womb of Night, it's really cool seeing people take the design that I created to engineer a certain experience and run with it successfully. And I think that's been really good. And then, because you asked for 3, I don't know if you saw one of the earlier live episodes. Dan made excellent use of a command spell, and I didn't know what to do afterwards. Like, he did it, and I was just so blown away. I had never seen anyone use that fairly boring first level cleric spell in such a creative way. And so every once in a while, these little moments will come up where someone does something, and I just like, I don't know how to respond. And I love that feeling of just being like, I couldn't possibly have planned for this. So thank you for watching and then letting me reminisce about it a little bit. I appreciate that. We got another one? Yeah.
Hello. So when asked about game design, you sometimes advise people to play a lot of games, to learn what works and what doesn't. But you know, life gets in the way. Sometimes you don't have time to play a lot of new games, and sometimes your group just doesn't feel like playing Dogs in the Vineyard with just D&D again. And do you have and my question is, do you have a special way of just reading the books and learning game design from reading? And is it even possible to learn how the game works, learn game design tips without playing the game, by just going through the book?
That's a good question.
Do you have any techniques or like, any advice?
Yeah. So the question was, can you, if you don't have time to play, because some games take dozens of sessions before you can kind of fully invest in understanding how the game works, but is there a way to read a game, what to look at in a game for whether it's a good game or not, whether you're going to enjoy it? Because that's a big challenge. Like it takes, like even for me, I didn't fully understand Burning Wheel, which is my favorite game of all time. And if anybody's keeping track, it took me 22 minutes to mention Burning Wheel. Even that game I found highly obscure until I played it. Like I basically understood the core stuff, and then when I saw it at the table, I was like, Oh, okay. I get it now. Like, there's a moment of revelation. And I do think that you need to play a game before you can fully understand it, but how much you need to play depends on the game. But there are some tricks that you can do when you look at a game. And it comes back to something I've talked about on the channel a bunch of times. Jared Sorensen, who's a game designer, he did Inspectors, which is a fantastic game. He has 3 questions that he uses to understand his own game designs, but you can apply it to any game, right? And those questions are, what is this game about? Right? You look at the game, you look at the art, you look at the text, you read the back cover. What does the game tell you that it's about? Is the game about personal horror and being a vampire? Is it about existential dread in the face of an uncaring universe? Is it about fantasy adventure? What is the game telling you, both on the cover and by flipping through it? This is the game store, as much as you get when you walk into a store and you flip through the book before you put it down and move on to the next thing. So start there. What is the game telling you that it's about? The next thing is, how is this game about that? So what mechanisms in the game prove to you that the game is about that thing, right? If you look at King Arthur Pendragon, for example, it says on the cover, it says in the book, it's a game of Arthurian legend. You're going to play Knights of the Round Table. The mechanisms of the game, your character is measured by their knightly virtues, right? They're measured by their bravery, by their chastity, by their piety. And that's a mechanism that informs and enforces how you play those characters. Right? So how does the game's systems reinforce or inform what you're going to be doing at the table? Now, this one's harder to do in the game store because mechanisms are spread out. So the third question, and this is for me the first place I start, if you've ever watched any of the RPG first looks, I jump right to the reward system in the game. What do the players get rewarded for playing, right? What is their incentive? What do they get XP for? What do they get karma for? What are they rewarded points for? And this is why usually when I get to this section and it says the players get a point of experience for showing up, I close the book and throw it out the window. Well, not if I'm in a game store, then it's not my book. I'll put it down gently. But for me, the reward cycle, it furnishes that third question. It's like, what are the players going to be rewarded for? Because a lot of RPGs say to you at the beginning, you can't win. This is not a game that works that way. I can win at Dungeons & Dragons. I want to get the most experience points of anybody in the group. What do I get XP for? Right? I get XP for overcoming encounters with monsters. So I'm going to pick the class that gives me the best advantage for that. I'm going to be chaotic evil, so I don't have to worry about being a nice guy, and I can just get XP. Not everybody plays that way or thinks that way, but it's a way to understand design. So look at what the game is telling you that it's about, and if you only have time to look for one mechanism, look at the reward structure in the game and see what the players are going to get rewards for. And that'll help. It's not going to be enough to fully understand a game, but honestly, some games, even after decades of playing them, I don't fully understand them. Maybe they're bad. Maybe I'm dense. I don't know. But games are tricky. They're a puzzle box of complex interlocking mechanisms that are applied very differently depending on the style of the game master, the player's experience, and all that. So I would start there. Try to answer Jared's 3 questions about a game if you can. And on a full read through, if you still don't have any idea about those 3 things, the game might not know, right? The game may not have any clear understanding. And that's the tricky thing. It's sometimes not you. Sometimes it's that the game doesn't know what it's about. And that comes from practice. Learn, like, read lots of games, try to narrow them down to the good ones, and then test them, right? Bring them to the table. Yeah, cool. More questions. Yeah, give them to me.
Hello.
Hello.
My question is, how do you respond as master of ceremony in PBTA game when a player, both in fiction and mechanically, how do you respond? When a player kind of doesn't fully hit the trigger or wants to work around the move trigger, or when you think that move cannot happen because you cannot like wound the scale worm because its armor is too thick. You want players to work around its armor. And how do you respond in fiction and mechanically too?
Yeah, that's a really great and very specific question, which is my favorite kind. So the question, in short, to make sure I understand, is in a Powered by the Apocalypse style game, whether Dungeon World or Apocalypse World or Monster Hearts or whatever, the fiction of the game, which is to say the things we are all saying to each other at the table, you know, Throndir doffs his cap to the princess, right? The fiction of the game is what triggers the mechanisms of the game. So doffing my cap to the princess might be trying to seduce or manipulate her, right? And that's a clear trigger, but it might not be, right? I might be trying to do something else. And I think that this feels to me like a truism, but you can ask. You can say, it sounds like, this is my favorite phrase after what do you do? It sounds like you're trying to name of the move, right? Like, I draw my sword and I attack the scaled worm. It sounds like you're trying to hack and slash. Is that what's going on? And the player might be like, no, I don't actually want to hurt the worm. I know I can't. I'm just trying to impress these people who are watching me by being brave, which is a totally different fictional trigger. Sometimes we can get caught up in the like literal moments where we can say like, you're drawing your sword and you're hitting a thing with your sword. That has to be hack and slash, right? We have this preordained idea of that. But you can ask, especially in a Powered by the Apocalypse game where there are all of these mechanisms for interrogating the fiction. You can just put your MC hat aside and look at that player and say, okay, what are you actually trying to do? You're being very unclear. I'm not sure. And then you can help them. The other thing is that I think that we can get caught up, and I learned this trick from John Harper. So John is a runaway train as a game master. He will just tell you things that are happening, and whether you want them to happen or not. He'll just say, the troll bursts into the room and he tears you in half. And you're like, can I not get torn in half? Or please? And he's like, oh yeah, you wanted to do something? What do you want to do, right? So there's this pacing that we can have as a game master where we can either with the players, if they're comfortable jumping in, we can do that. We can just say like, here's the terrible thing that already happened unless you stop it. Or you can just slow it down and you can ask and you can confirm. And that's really useful if you're looking to get into a Powered by the Apocalypse game for the first time. It's really useful to do both as a game master and as a player because it's the whole table's responsibility to listen for fictional triggers of moves. So just asking what they intend and then letting them backtrack a little bit. So if they sound like they're trying to do something and you say, it sounds like you're trying to hack and slash, and they're like, oh no, I was trying to backstab. Right? It's similar, but the fictional trigger is a little different. You can say, okay, well, what you described isn't really backstab, right? That's not quite what it is. You're gonna have to do something else first. Do you wanna rewind a little bit? And instead of you jumping out of the airship onto the worm, do you wanna try this another way, right? I think, again, we get caught up in immersion and verisimilitude and this idea that like, once you said it, it's true forever. But you can rewind, you can play with that and let the players clarify, and they'll get better at it. The more you do it, the better they're gonna get at hitting those triggers. Yeah, cool. And if you find, just as a footnote, if you find that people are consistently trying to do something that's not a move, but it's close to the move, write a custom move for that thing. Like if they have something else that they all want in the game, that's a great signal to design something new and put it in, because it's responding to the fiction, but on a deeper level. Yeah. We got a question over here? We have many questions over here. I love it. These panels are always terrifying because I'm like, what if I get up here and I'm like, does anybody have a question? Everybody just stares at me and I'm like, cool, if the question was, do I want to feel awkward? No, but thank you.
Considering treating people like people, people are different and some are more charismatic, which is obvious. And when I'm GMing, that's a different thing because obviously people look up to me as the master of ceremony. Yeah. But when I'm playing, and even if I'm playing with people who haven't played with me as a GM, people tend to flock in terms of opinion. And how do you deal with that, either as a player of not doing what you are or what you do, or as a GM when you have a person that decides on things, and not in their aggressive way. I was like, let's do this because this is good. And it's like, no, it's just, I have this opinion and just people tend to flock to that opinion. So how do you deal with that?
Yeah, so the question is like if you have someone in your group, or maybe you are this person, that the other players defer to your opinion because maybe they're used to you as the GM, or you are more comfortable taking the lead, maybe you're more familiar with the rules, or you just have played more role-playing games, and so everyone looks at you when something is going to happen. How do you kind of step back from that spotlight and share it with the other players? I think you can, when you feel this happening, you can address it, right? You can say to the other players like, hey, like I appreciate all of the faith that you're putting in me, but I want everyone else to have a say too. I don't want to necessarily be the leader of the party, right? So you can talk to them about that and tell them like, I'm not going to make the decisions. I'm going to follow you. You can build that into your character as well. So if you know that it's going to happen and you have someone else who might be comfortable, but not as much as you. You could say, make a character that is deferential to them in some way, right? You could say, my character has sworn an oath to follow you. I'm the Chewbacca to your Han Solo, right? Because when something goes wrong, people don't look at Chewie and are like, hey, Chewie, what do you want to do? Because Chewie's just like, right? Like, ask Han. If you don't want to be Han, make a character that is like someone's bodyguard or someone's like sworn ally or something, and let them in the fiction. Yeah, and let them do that. So you can use the fiction as a tool to post up other characters. We had this happen in Swansong, where Jeff is a very outspoken player. He's very used to taking the lead, and he came to me before we started, and he said, I just want to be the muscle. Like, I have this thing that I do where I take over the game, and I don't want to do that. So I'm going to play a character who is just like the kind of bodyguard for the ship, and he's the enforcer, and I'm going to try to let someone else take that role. And it opened up space for Marcus, for DJ Wheat, to kind of take over a leadership role. Though if you asked Higgs, he would disagree. But you can do it. You have this tool in the game to look for that framework and turn it over. I'm kind of bad about this, where like my characters tend to be fairly outspoken and obnoxious. And I like that, and it's not because I want attention, but because I like keeping things going and maintaining momentum. But I'm also like very aware and very sensitive to the idea that I don't want to steamroll the game. I don't want to be like, let's go ahead. And if anybody watched Blood Letters, which was the show that we did for Blades in the Dark on my channel, I had a conversation with the other players where I said, I'm going to play Cantor Haig. He's a huge jerk. I'm going to be loud, and I'm going to be obnoxious. Please do not let that mean that I'm in charge. Like, tell me no. Be like, Cantor, shut up, you're wrong. And as a player, that's what I want. I want to play the guy who's a wrong-headed idiot in the party. And so we talked about that before we went into the game. But you've already done the first step, right? Which is realizing that you do that, and sometimes players do that to you, and they put you in that position. It's much worse when you don't realize that, and you have one person who's just steamrolling the other players, and they're not thinking about it. If you have a player like that in your group, take them aside gently and be like, I appreciate your enthusiasm. You're doing great, but maybe the other 3 people at the table could ever speak or choose to do anything. You're going to know these players better than I do, so treat them like people, talk to them, and just be aware that that's a thing that can happen. And it's fine sometimes if one character is in the spotlight. Or you can have whole episodes where it's like, this is my episode, but you don't want every single session to be like that. Yeah, cool. I hope that helped. Basically, slow your roll. Let somebody else take over.
Hi. I have a quick question about a big problem that I have in my dungeon mastering or game mastering. I tend to start campaigns, I get really into them, I keep the campaigns going, but at some point I need to end them. Yeah. And this is where I struggle. I don't know how to end campaigns.
You have the opposite problem of every other dungeon master in the history of time, where they start campaigns, and then they see another game in the game store, and they're like that meme where it's like, I'm the guy, and then my girlfriend is D&D, and I'm looking over here at Burning Wheel like, oh, you're hot. You have the opposite problem of most people, so be happy for that. But for folks who also have this, like, I started it and we're rambling along and eventually we want to come to an end because I don't want to play this game forever, and a narrative with no ending is not great. Like, it's hard to feel satisfied. Like, you can feel good moment to moment, but if you're not going anywhere, it's hard to do. So look first at the game. Some games will tell you how long they are meant to be played. Acknowledge that at the beginning, right? Apocalypse World says in it, you can play it for more than 12 sessions, but by the time you get to session 12, things are either going to be totally different or not really. Like, everyone's got all their moves they need and they have all their good stats at +3. Like, find a way to kind of aim it out for that. And so you know in advance. So you can say we have 1 HBO series season worth of episodes. I did that the last time I played Apocalypse World, and I sat down with everybody. I'm like, we're going to play 10 to 12, and at the end of an episode, we're going to know, like, around that time, that this is the time to end it. If you've watched any of the shows where I actually managed to finish an arc or finish a campaign, like Nebula Jazz or Mirror Shades or the most recent series in Far Verona, I like to use epilogues as a tool. So we'll get them to the end of a particular arc, right? Something that's important. Maybe they overcome an antagonist. Maybe they discover a hidden secret. And then I'll say, all right, this thing is resolved. Maybe not everything is resolved, right? Because in play, you're constantly developing new threads, things are going unfinished, and that'll be true forever. The game will never end itself for you unless it has mechanical protocols for that. But when you get to a significant moment, the end of like a season, confirm with your players. You can say like, how do we feel? Like, do you want to play something different? How do we feel about the campaign ending? And if they're into it, give them a chance to end their character's story. If not forever, some players will be like, oh, it's the last episode? Cool, I blow myself up, right? Which is fine, that's a cool ending. They've been waiting to blow themselves up. They've been spending the whole game trying not to die, and now they're like, awesome. I draw my swords and I jump on the dragon by myself. I'm gonna go out in a blaze of glory. But often they'll want to, and this is a trick I stole from Fiasco, is just give everyone an opportunity to do a scene, right? To say, all right, tell us what happens to your character. If you've ever seen like an 80s movie, especially a John Hughes movie, when they roll the credits, they'll show like still shots of the characters and be like, these characters got married and lived in Nevada, and this character died in a car accident, and they kind of give you these little blurbs about them. Let your players write those about their characters. Let them deliver that. And maybe it's a scene, maybe it's me and another character, or maybe it's just a little monologue to say, well, after our last adventure, my wounds were too grievous, and I went off into the west to live among the elves with Sam and lived happily ever after. But that gives your players the ability to finish their own story, and I think that can be super rewarding for players. So it's not so much about coming up with an ending, but recognizing where the endings already might exist in your narrative, and then asking the players, like, are we done, or do we want to do another season, right? Treat it like a TV show, renew it or don't, and give them that opportunity. Just don't treat it like a TV show that gets canceled after a cliffhanger. Let them have their moment. Cool. I think we probably have time for a couple more.
Yeah, like about 2 questions.
Okay, cool.
For certain.
Hi, Adam.
Hello.
I just want to thank you because Danger War was my first game. I was GMing, so thank you very much.
Cool, you're welcome.
I have one question. My players love to laugh and have fun and don't care about emotional things with my session, but I really, really want to show them the direction about emotional session or history about self-consciousness about himself and feel sorry and don't explode of laughing every time something bad happens.
Yeah.
So if you help me show the direction or show the game who is the best about feelings and emotional play of the players.
Yeah, so one of 2 things can happen. So the question was that the GM is playing with players who show up to the game to just kind of like goof around and have fun and kind of laugh about what's going on. It's not a serious narrative. And that's cool. Like, that's a way to play. But if your creative agenda includes like emotional moments, it can be really hard when you introduce an NPC that you want to be integral to the story. You want to have a reaction, and then they just like stab them and run off laughing, and you're like, but my feelings. You killed my feelings. It was a metaphor. So one of 2 things can happen. One, this just might be the style of play that they want. You might be the odd one out, and if you didn't have that conversation beforehand to see if that was about, and maybe you didn't know that yourself, right? But it may just be conflicting play styles. Like, they may just want like beer and pretzels D&D, and you might want something more intense and deeper, and it may just be a clash of styles, in which case you might have to find other people to play with, right? And I know you're, face palming, but that might be how it is. The other thing that might be happening, and I think this is more common in games where things get kind of real, whether it's a horror game or just where you want someone to like care that a character is in a bad way or whatever, is that people respond to feeling tense with laughter, right? When we feel like I'm uncomfortable, that I might feel sad about this, let's make a joke so I don't have to feel weird, and then we can all just move on and kill some more orcs, even though these orcs are people and they have families, right? It's a way that we can avoid dealing with that stuff. So figure out which of those it is. You can just ask your players. You can say, like, I want to inject some more like feelings into our game. Does that sound like something that you guys want to do? And give them some time to sit with it. Because if you put this pressure on at the very beginning of a session, you're probably going to get that same response. They're just going to be like, no, get away from me with your feelings. But if you do it at the beginning of a campaign, or you do it at the beginning of an arc, right? If you finish doing something and you say, okay, I kind of want to try something a little different, I need you guys to support me on that. How do you feel? I think they're more likely to hear that and to buy in. But like you said, the game that you play is important because like D&D doesn't care how you feel about getting experience points, right? That's all player level stuff. As far as a game that forces players to like invest emotionally, they're usually paired up with different subject matter, right? There aren't a lot of fantasy role-playing games that are also games about feelings, right? So the advice that I gave to the first question asker, try another game, try an episode, like do a one-shot of Monster Hearts, or play another game where the players have a reason mechanically to invest in their characters. But again, it's gotta be a match of the group. So make sure you have buy-in from them. I wish that there was an easy answer. I wish that I could be like, say this magic phrase, and then they will just become human beings who care about poetry and cinema and shit, but that phrase does not exist. Or if it does, I don't know those magic words. All right, let's do one more. I think we have one in the front.
I'm afraid we have run out of time.
All right, so instead of doing one more question, we're gonna finish up here, and then I'm gonna go out there probably. I'll get handled somewhere. If you have questions and I didn't get to answer them, or you just want me to like sign something or hang out for a bit, come follow me. Chat, you can't. Sorry, we're done with you. But we're at a con and you're not. But thank you for coming too. Thank you for coming, everybody, and asking questions and being awesome. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.